You think you know Henry VIII, right? The king with 6 wives who founded the Church of England. Well, buckle up, because the real Henry VIII in his final years was so much worse than any history textbook dares to tell you. We're talking about a man whose rotting leg wound smelled so horrific that the stench could be detected from 3 rooms away. A ruler whose own body was falling apart so dramatically that his coffin literally exploded from the gases of his decomposing corpse. You're about to discover 5 shocking truths about Henry VIII's paranoid final years that make Game of Thrones look like a children's fairy tale. From his grotesque physical decay to his paranoid execution sprees, from his bizarre eating rituals that consumed 5,000 calories daily to his psychological torture of everyone around him. These are the facts that will change everything you thought you knew about England's most infamous king. You don't learn this in school, but by his final decade, Henry had become a living nightmare. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll never think of royalty the same way again. This isn't just history. This is horror. Number 1, his body became a walking horror show. Let's start with the most shocking truth about Henry VII's final years. By the 1540s, he was literally a walking corpse. We're talking about a man whose body had become so grotesque that even his own servants were traumatized. After his devastating jousting accident in 1536, Henry's once athletic frame exploded into massive obesity. His waist measured 54 inches. To put that in perspective, that's bigger around than most people are tall. Modern experts believe he weighed around 400 pounds in an era when the average man weighed maybe 140. But here's the truly horrifying part. It wasn't just obesity. His legs were covered in festering open wounds that never healed. These weren't small cuts. We're talking about massive ulcers that oozed pus and rotted flesh continuously. Historical accounts describe how the stench from his infected ulcers could be identified 3 rooms away, often heralding the monarch's arrival before anyone could see him. Servants actually drew straws to determine who had to help dress him, because getting close to those wounds was considered a form of punishment. The smell was so overwhelming that courtiers would hold perfumed handkerchiefs to their faces when approaching the king. Some accounts describe people literally running away, gagging when they caught a whiff of his rotting legs. But wait, it gets worse. The man who claimed divine right to rule couldn't even control his own bowel movements in his final years. Royal attendants had to carry special chairs everywhere he went because Henry could barely make it from room to room without having an accident. By 1540, he needed a primitive mechanical lift operated by sweating guards just to reach his first-floor apartments. This is the same guy who executed people for looking at him the wrong way. But his physical decay was nothing compared to what he did to his closest friends. Number 2, he executed his most loyal friends in paranoid rages. Everyone knows Henry VIII executed 2 wives, but the reality of what he did to his closest allies goes far beyond royal marriages. We're talking about paranoid betrayals that would make modern dictators jealous. By the 1540s, Henry had become so suspicious that no one, absolutely no one, was safe from his explosive rage. Take Thomas Cromwell, the man who literally helped Henry break from Rome and become head of the Church of England. This guy was Henry's most trusted advisor for nearly a decade, orchestrating the king's divorce from Catherine of Aragon and managing the English Reformation. But in 1540, Henry turned on him with stunning brutality. At a routine council meeting, Cromwell was suddenly arrested as a traitor and heretic. The man who had served Henry faithfully for years was executed within 3 months. Here's something that will blow your mind. Less than a year after Cromwell's execution, the French ambassador recorded Henry saying he sometimes regretted Cromwell's death, admitting that his ministers had made him execute the most faithful servant he ever had based on false accusations. But by then, it was too late. The damage was done. Thomas More got it even worse. Henry's former friend and Lord Chancellor was imprisoned in the Tower of London for over a year, subjected to psychological torture because he wouldn't approve Henry's marriage to. Anne Boleyn. More, a brilliant scholar and writer, was eventually beheaded in 1535 for refusing to acknowledge Henry as head of the church. But here's the truly sick part. Henry didn't just execute these men quickly, he made them suffer. He stripped them of their titles, seized their property, and destroyed their families' reputations. These were people who had dedicated their lives to serving him, and Henry turned on them the moment they became inconvenient or slightly disagreed with his increasingly erratic decisions. The man who once charmed courtiers with his wit and intelligence had become a paranoid monster who destroyed anyone who got too close. But Henry's madness wasn't limited to political executions. His eating habits were absolutely deranged. Number 3, his eating habits were beyond disgusting. If you think competitive eating is crazy today, wait until you hear about Henry the daily food consumption in his final years. This man didn't just eat like a king. He ate like he was trying to. Single-handedly cause a famine. Henry consumed roughly 5,000 calories per day, which is more than double what an active adult male should eat. And remember, this guy could barely walk by the end of his life. But the sheer quantity wasn't even the weirdest part. It was what he ate and how he ate it. A typical meal for Henry included an entire roasted pig, multiple whole chickens, several types of fish, mountains of bread, and enough wine to float a small boat. His kitchen staff prepared over 800 different dishes every single day just for his household, with Henry personally sampling dozens of them. Here's where it gets truly bizarre. Henry was convinced that certain foods had magical properties. He believed eating swan would make him more graceful, consuming large amounts of deer would make him a better hunter, and that oysters would enhance his performance with his wives. So he'd gorge himself on these specific foods in massive quantities, like some kind of medieval superfood obsession. The man also had the strangest eating rituals. Every single piece of food that entered Henry's mouth was first tasted by multiple servants to check for poison. But get this, he was so paranoid that he required his food tasters to wait 30 minutes after eating before he'd touch anything just to make sure they didn't drop dead from delayed acting poison. You don't learn this in schools, but Henry actually banned certain foods from his court, not because they were unhealthy, but because he thought they were beneath his royal status. Common people's food like turnips and barley were literally illegal at his table. Meanwhile, his yearly consumption included 1,240 oxen, 8,200 sheep, 2,330 deer, 760 calves, 1,870 pigs, and 53 wild boar. That's more than 14,000 large animals just for the royal household. His meals were basically theatrical performances that could last up to 4 hours, with hundreds of courtiers forced to watch him stuff his face. But his paranoia about food was just the tip of the iceberg. Number 4, he turned England into a surveillance state. Henry VIII's paranoia in his final years wasn't just your typical trust no one attitude. This man turned his entire kingdom into a surveillance state that would make modern dictators jealous. By the 1540s, Henry was so convinced that everyone was plotting against him that he transformed royal life into a living nightmare for everyone around him. Let's start with his sleeping arrangements. Henry slept with loaded crossbows next to his bed and kept multiple daggers under his pillow. But that wasn't enough. He also had armed guards stationed inside his bedroom, watching him sleep all night. Imagine being so terrified of assassination that you couldn't even close your eyes without witnesses. The palace itself became a fortress of paranoia. Henry ordered the construction of secret passages throughout every building he lived in, not for romance or convenience, but so he could escape if assassins came for him. He had peepholes installed in walls, so he could spy on his own quarters and listening devices hidden in meeting rooms to eavesdrop on private conversations. But here's where it gets truly insane. Henry created an entire network of spies whose job was to spy on his other spies. He had informants watching his informants, creating this twisted web of surveillance where nobody knew who they could trust. Court life became a gup psychological horror show where saying the wrong thing to the wrong person could literally get you executed. The man even suspected his own children of plotting against him. He had spies watching Princess Mary and Princess Elizabeth, his own daughters, because he was convinced they were planning to overthrow him. These were children, and he treated them like enemy agents in their own home. Henry's paranoia got so extreme that he started executing people for crimes they hadn't even committed yet. He'd have someone killed because he dreamed they betrayed him or because someone else suggested they might be disloyal in the future. The Tower of London was constantly full of people whose only crime was existing near Henry while he was in one of his paranoid moods. From 1540 onward, his mental state was visibly deteriorating. Modern experts believe he suffered from major psychological symptoms, including severe paranoia and mental decline, possibly triggered by his traumatic brain injury from the 1536 jousting accident. But even death couldn't stop Henry's reign of chaos. Number 5, even his death was a disgusting disaster. You'd think Henry VII's reign of terror would end with his death in January 1547, right? Wrong. This man was so committed to being a disaster that even his corpse managed to cause absolute mayhem. Let's start with his final weeks. Henry was so massive that he couldn't walk, so his servants had to carry him everywhere using a specially designed chair with pulleys and wheels. But here's the disgusting part. His leg wounds had become so infected that pieces of rotting flesh would literally fall off his body as they moved him. Servants had to follow behind him with cloths to clean up the chunks of decomposing king that dropped on the palace floors. His death scene was like something out of a horror movie. Henry's body had swollen to such grotesque proportions that his skin was stretched tight and shiny. The smell was so overwhelming that even his doctors, who were used to medieval medical horrors, had to leave the room to vomit. When he finally died, nobody wanted to get close, enough to officially confirm he was dead. But wait, it gets so much worse. Henry's body was so bloated with gases from internal decomposition that his coffin had to be specially reinforced. They wrapped his corpse in lead sheets and sealed it in multiple wooden boxes, thinking that would contain the mess. They were very, very wrong. Here's the truly incredible part. During the funeral procession from London to Windsor Castle, the coffin literally exploded. The gases from Henry's decomposing body built up so much pressure that the lead lining burst open and rotting royal remains splattered all over the inside of the hearse. Historical accounts describe how dogs were reportedly seen licking up the remains of Henry VIII that had leaked from his coffin onto the road. The man who claimed to rule by divine right ended up as dog food on a country highway. Several servants who handled his body during the funeral preparations died within weeks, possibly from infections they caught from contact with his rotting corpse. So there you have it. The real Henry VIII in his paranoid final years, a walking disaster whose own body betrayed him as dramatically as he betrayed everyone around him. A man who transformed from an athletic, charismatic young king into a paranoid, rotting tyrant who terrorized his entire kingdom. If these disturbing royal facts shocked you, hit that subscribe button, because there are plenty more horrifying truths that history books conveniently leave out. Trust me, you haven't heard anything yet. The medieval world was full of rulers whose final years make Henry VII look tame by comparison. This isn't just history.